What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Takeover with your girl, Shay McCray, here on FUBU Radio. And as always, we always get excited when it's inside the room with State Representative Brandon McGee. But today, he brought a guest with him. And I am so excited to speak to this person right here because not only do we share some things in common, like being a mom, but she's an advocate for women empowerment and so many other things that help uplift each other. So I would like to welcome to the takeover, Ms. Joelle Murchison. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us, as well as my brother B. What's up, B?
What's going on? And of course, as always, thank you for joining Inside the Room with myself, State Representative Brandon McGee, where we discuss politics, leadership, and culture. And of course, just a little bit of gossip every now and again. And I am just very delighted and privileged to be in the same room with my big sister, Joelle Murchison. And there's so much to be said about her and the work that she does, but I'm just glad that she's here. She's on FUBU Radio with us inside the room.
Yes, and doing amazing things. And just, come on, girl, we gotta go ahead. It's your time now to talk.
So before she jumps in, I just, throughout the past week, many events they took place that affect the way we view our health and national safety, et cetera. And Shay, as you already mentioned, during today's episode segment, we plan to discuss a range of topics, but more specifically around diversity, equity, inclusion, and its impact on women of color, quite frankly.
Yes.
And I want to be a bit more intentional with our usage of words, Black women. So, joining us today is a strategic consultant, a diversity and inclusion champion, former Dow 30 CDO. She'll explain all of those fancy titles, a moderator, a workshop leader, an entrepreneur, a mom, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, a mother of a daughter who's about to go to college. I can keep going.
Keep going, right?
I'll leave some space. I'll leave some space for her to kind of tell her story. But she also specializes in, before I get to that, Joelle holds many degrees, a degree undergraduate from Brown University. She's got 2 masters from Harvard Graduate School of Education and Syracuse University's Newhouse School of Public Communications. So we've got the right one to communicate to us on today's topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I do want to take a moment, Joelle, just to give you some space to just jump in and kind of tell us who you are. And then I kind of want to back in and talk a little bit about a case, a 1976 case that really, I think, served as a precedent of inequalities in the system and how we should continue to work toward finding diversity and equity and inclusion in workspaces. But go ahead, Joelle.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to start off by saying, I'm just a little Black girl from Jamaica, Queens.
And
New
York in the house. Look.
Shay is from New York. Okay.
So it's a pleasure, to have you here on FUBU Radio for us by us, because you already know Queens is in the building, so
That's
you
right.
know where it come from.
That's right. So it's funny when I think back because there's so many things from just growing up, different lessons and things that helped me both, from school, from church. I went to public school in Queens, and I was in a special program that when I look back at my kindergarten picture, it is literally like one of those United Nations. And I didn't realize back then, and we're talking about, this is 1970 something, that, at that time, there was this intentional effort to bring these kids together. I never thought about it in that way. Moved out to Long Island ultimately later on, and the district that I lived in was literally Black and white. So some of the United Nations that I experienced being in Queens was no more. And what we started to hear was this reality about the browning of the district, or you would hear people refer to the high school as the zoo, right? Because the school district would get whiter because white parents would remove their kids after middle school because of this whole concept that the high school was the zoo, right? And so hearing things like that, or living on the side of town in this district, it was made up of a predominantly white town and a predominantly black town. But I lived on the side of the ocean. The main street that went through was called Ocean Avenue. So I lived on the side of the ocean that was the black side. And I was like, I wonder, did the realtors really intentionally say, oh, you all want to look at houses in this town? Well, we're going to show you these right here. And so all of that sort of in growing up and recognizing at that time that even our school district was impacted by it. It was one of the first districts in New York State that they considered to be perfectly desegregated. And it was just because it was black and white. There were all kind of court cases. My teachers, I didn't even realize, were involved in all of these protests. But, herein is this district that now this little black girl is fighting to get people to approve the budget, because otherwise that meant that we wouldn't have new school books, we wouldn't have buses, and because the community was changing, people were rebelling, right? I'm not paying for all of that. My kids went through already, all that kind of stuff. So early on, I understood what inequity was. It was clear to me that our district, where we had to fight to get those things, the district next door to us, which was predominantly white, they had pools and all kinds of things in their schools. We didn't have any of that. We shared an auditorium with the high school and the middle school. We didn't have necessarily all of the textbooks. And this is suburban New York. But that's what made me say, as like an 11-year-old, here I am going door to door, begging people to pass the school budget so we can have the same, at least the same, as the people next door. So early on, I became really acutely aware of the existence of inequity. And before I really even knew it, it became my passion, my life's mission. I knew that I wanted to do something. I initially wanted to be a lawyer because I just thought it wasn't fair. There has to be a better way that students can be educated, not based upon where they live or what their parents can afford, but that they should have equitable opportunities. I went to college with that in mind, was convinced not to go to law school, and ended up doing public policy and education and going to grad school. When I graduated from high school, I said that I was going to be the Secretary of Education of the United States because I wanted to change K-12 education. Now, that has not happened. However, I have found other ways throughout my career to impact access for individuals whose voices may not always be at the table. And that's really at the core when I think about how I got into diversity and inclusion. I think it was just ultimately a part of who I am as a person. What I saw early on manifested into how do I create spaces in whatever industry or sector it is. I've worked in nonprofit, higher ed, and corporate America. How do I use my voice and my influence to create change in spaces so that individuals will have equitable access? And it really started from, when I look back now, all those years ago, realizing something wasn't right. Like, how come it's not fair that we're not getting the same things as those children? And why? Is it because of what we look like? So learning that at 11, that changes you. And makes you really.
That's a very interesting story. It's a very interesting story, and I appreciate you for sharing that. Now, my question to you, I do know that there was a big thing with the different tones of the skin. Did you notice back then that you were more privileged than the darker toned children?
It's funny. I didn't realize that until I moved to Connecticut. Now, this is not a dig to Connecticut at all, but I will say that
it's the truth.
When I was in New York, I was a little black girl from Queens, little black girl. The only exception I would say is when I was in middle school and, folks would say, oh, you're Oreo, right? Black on the outside, white on the inside, because we were in honors classes or, so it pains me that kids still have to endure that today. Like, really, like all of a sudden, why is it that being smart is acting white. Why is
Equivalent
that?
to white.
Tell me that.
Yeah, like
I
how
don't
do
get that.
how do we get that? Like where did that happen?
Who came up with that?
Yeah, like and why are we perpetuating it, right?
Exactly.
In our families, in our communities. Why are people like, oh yeah, so it wasn't until I moved here. I was 26 years old when I moved to Connecticut, and people were like, oh wow, yellow or whatever, will call me like yellow girl or whatever. And I was like, I really, like, honestly, I didn't like go and look in the mirror and be like, oh, look how light I am, right? But it was as an adult, as a young adult, when I moved to Connecticut. And so
what
New
part
York,
of Connecticut,
I don't remember that.
If you mind me asking, where
and
did you move?
I moved to Middletown initially.
Of course. Yeah, makes sense.
I moved to Middletown, and it was that, it was, oh, you're yellow girl. It was, what are you mixed with? In college, I got a little bit of that too. What are you mixed with? Or are you Black and Asian? Are you, and I don't know the I situation. I don't know where that's from. We did Ancestry.com. I don't know. Well, I have no Asian in my family. But I was like, I'm Black and Black. My father is from North Carolina. My mother's family originated down in South Carolina and Georgia. I was like, I'm Black and Black.
Wow.
And so, describing to people even the whole notion of miscegenation, like how I look like this and I'm Black, right? When we go back to, and when I visited Ghana and Senegal when I was in college, the host family there was like, we don't know where you're from, because they can determine down to what tribal nation you're a part of based upon your features, your nose, your placement of your lips and things like that. They can tell, like, oh, you're from the such and such people from that region. But for African Americans, there's been so many blends and mixtures and things that have happened and taken place over time that we have morphed in some instances, such that the people from our homeland, right, where we're from, they don't recognize us in that sense. That was a big takeaway for me too. Like, I was totally Sister Soldier when I got to college, and here I am, I'm going to West Africa. I was like, yes, I'm going to the motherland. And they were like, I don't know where you're from here. Like, we're not really so sure where you're from. Wow. So much so that the host family, she really, the mother, she was like really like looking at me very intently, trying to figure out like who I look like.
Where's she from?
Yeah, like, where is she from? The little kids, when I walked into the town, they were saying Yevu, Yevu, which means white girl in their language. Wow. So I was like, I was mortified, so much so that my host mother was like, let me make you a bracelet. These are traditional, and I was in the Volta region of Ghana. She was like, these are traditional beads. You are now one of us. Because literally, she was like, I don't know. And so all of that we carry, right? When people talk about PTSD and all this other stuff, like, we don't really fit in necessarily anywhere. People are always going to try and decide who you are. You don't get to identify who you are. And even that whole notion of assuming that because I'm lighter complected, I know that I have privilege as a result of that. I'm more comfortable to people, right? They're like, oh, okay.
She's nice. She's sweet.
Yeah, like, I can talk to her. I get it. I totally understand it. And I will use it as much as I need to.
And it's interesting, Joelle, you mentioned that. Shay and I, we talk about that often. Shay, she's been in the sun a little bit, traveling. But Shay is light-skinned, pretty hair, and
you know what?
We've talked about this. I'm telling you.
We have talked about this, and it's me and my sister, and I do have a interracial. My mom is Italian, so my father was African American, dark skin. So my sister's your complexion. Here I am, the brown tone. So there were a lot of things that went on in school. That's why I asked you the question, because I did notice, like, I can remember being treated differently with my grandmother versus my sister, even in the household, so just because of the skin tone. So we appreciate you for sharing this story. It's so amazing. And let
me ask this, Joelle, given your career in corporate America and just being in those spaces, how has your childhood, the story that you just shared with us, how has that shaped sort of your work?
Yes.
And how have you been able to kind of get to where you are, seasoned professional, successful in everything that you're doing. And I don't want to get too far in, like, ahead of myself here, but how has that shaped your work, your career thus far?
Well, I'll say in one thing, reflecting back to the whole comment about, being called Oreo and things like that when I was younger, my family never allowed me, or my village never allowed me to believe that. So it was said, but it was nothing I ever embraced, right? And so I've never been in the position where I felt like I didn't do the work that meant that I deserved to be where I was. Like I never thought about that. So as I went off to Brown, and people are like, oh, you went to Ivy League school, really? And then I'm like, I always felt like I deserved to be where I was, and made sure that I was a vital part of the places where I was. You weren't going to have me there and then cause me to feel like I was some cast off. No, you invited me here. I'm here. Oh, well, I'm going to be a part of it. I'm going to be in
Or
everything.
not only were you invited, but you worked hard.
Correct.
It wasn't like it was
Correct.
given to you so easily. And I think that's the part that frustrates me the most when we talk about women of color, successful women of color getting to where they are. Yeah. No, not all women are sleeping their way to the top.
Not at all.
Not at all. Not at all. Not even close. And it's funny because I have a mentor who, unfortunately, she passed away 2 years ago. She was really one of the first Black women in the insurance company that I worked for. And she was constantly, we're talking about in the 80s, it was her, right? Surrounded by white men who realistically, in many instances, had a lot of fetishes about Black women.
That's right.
And, she was real honest with me even in the 2000s. Like, listen, there's some people that you can trust. There's others that when, invitations are extended, oh, you want to grab a drink here, whatever, you might want to go on, those things that we have to be thoughtful about, right? And mindful about where we go, who we're going with, who we trust, what things people might say that you may have let your guard down, and perhaps you trust them, and then you're like, oh, right? So I think one of the things that, to the point of, the village, or the importance of particularly us as sisters, but in general, supporting one another and helping us to navigate through these spaces. Like, just because you got there, you have an accountability, a responsibility to help along those who are coming forward. That was absolutely modeled to me. So whenever a new person would start, I was like, hey, welcome. I'm here, whatever you need. Even in those moments where we would struggle, and I think this is particularly important for Black women, we would have to find our spaces to be able to just decompress and breathe. So often my office was that. Folks will come in the office, close the door. You don't even have to say anything, right? When you started to say something, it might not be, for typical corporate consumption, but it had to be said. You did what you needed to do. You got to cry, whatever you need to do, got a hug, and you went back out there and did what you had to do. We really were intentional about having a support system of sisters who were there. And I feel very fortunate for having had that during my longest corporate stint, because that is really what held me up. Now, I've also had experiences where I've worked in places and Black women have let me down. And I've been, and so it was one of those eye openers to me where I was like, oh, I guess everybody doesn't roll, as my mother used to say, everybody's not you, right? There are some of us who unfortunately are intimidated by each other. And because they've created space in organizations, they're like, well, this is my space. Like, who is she? Why is she here now? She might, people might like her better than me. And that's so unfortunate that we feel like we have to compete with one another. I say to people, where they do that at? Like, I never had that experience until it happened to me.
It's funny you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, have you ever found yourself in a situation that you were maybe looking for an advancement to the next level, whether it's in corporate or in school, and you were obviously, it was between you and another sister of color, maybe of a darker tone, and you got it because of your tone, and how did it make you feel?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know that was ever the case. Because in most instances in my career, the opportunities that I've had, I've been very, very fortunate and blessed that I haven't necessarily gone out to look for opportunities. Someone has said, hey, I'm getting ready to leave this. I want to introduce you to, or sis, you should think about this. I've been really fortunate in that sense, where in a lot of instances, I haven't even known if there were other, folks competing, what have you. But it is, when I look back at, I lived through very rose-colored glasses of like, Black women, we always, we're rooting for everybody Black, until I got to that point in time. And I was like, oh, I guess maybe everybody is not rooting for everybody Black. And so it's always jarring when it happens, because I tell my mentees, I'm like, that's not, we don't do that. That's not how we roll, right? But to see that, it definitely takes you to a different level. But for me, I was like, okay, that's all right. That's what you need to be whole, right? So I'm going to let you live over there, and I'm going to do what I came here to do, right? I have a responsibility. I was brought here for a reason. And so I'm going to do what I need to do. It's unfortunate. And it still actually sometimes really pains me when I stop and think about it. But as my mother has always said, everybody's not you. So
look, she's like, mind the business that pays you, and that's what I'm going to do. We're going to take a quick break while we're here. When we come back, I know we want to talk about the company that you have founded, and some of the services that you offer, because I believe it's amazing. And this is some of the things that we need, because it's not being taught in the household. So you guys keep it locked. We'll be back inside the room with State Representative Brandon McGee on The Takeover. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Takeover, as we are inside the room with State Representative Brandon McGee. And of course, he brought his big sister with him, Miss Joelle. How you doing?
I'm great.
Well, we appreciate you. If you guys are just now tuning in, you guys are missing a phenomenal conversation in regards to just Black on Black kind of competition, Black on Black segregation and within our own community, and just so many other things. And Joelle brought light to her experience living in Jamaican Queens, and just growing up there, and then moving to Connecticut and realizing that the privileges that she has been given is a little bit different than someone with a different tone of skin. And I know they talked about this. I always reference back to this, the Jack and Jill experience. A lot of people don't know. I know Brandon always looked like that when I say that, but you were determined by the color of your skin. And
lots of things. The whole paper bag test. I mean, historically, and it's interesting you say that, because people will make the assumption that I'm an AKA. For example, we talked about the fact that I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta, but because of my complexion, people, because of my complexion, people will say, oh, I thought you were an AKA. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's deep. And someone actually told me recently that wherever they went to school, I can't remember what it was, that because there was done, this was, 20 years ago, but because there was still so much of that, like the AKs are light skin, the Deltas are brown skin, that kind of thing. Like that's
what perpetuated that, though.
Really?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's not on white people. That's on us.
See what I'm saying? Within our own community, once again.
That's on our own. Yeah, that's on us. And I mean, even, so there are a lot of organizations where, unfortunately, and I mean, if you look at countries across the world, whether you're talking about race, which is really akin to here in the United States, or if you're talking about color, the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson talks a lot about that, the notion of just simply your skin tone determining your access to wealth, to resources, and so on and so forth. Looking at the island nations in the Caribbean, same stuff. Some of the same stuff on the motherland. I mean, so some of it has to do with how historically, and really this talks about, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the origin of race, where it even came from, was that it was established, essentially, it's a societal structure that was created to make a distinction between a group of people and others. How do you maintain the power and the wealth that you have? Well, those Europeans at that point in time were like, listen, those people that look like that, we're going to make them less than, right? So, less of a person. not able to access all the facilities. We'll create separate facilities for them. Now, understand, some of us embrace that. And so we're like, oh, we're not worthy of having, right? But some of us were like, no, we are. And all of those things that they did to ensure that we wouldn't remember where we came from, we do still recall those. And that's why it's important for us to help our children to understand, never mind worrying about whether it's taught in schools. It's critically important that we learn Black and Latino history in our schools, for sure.
Right.
But we have a responsibility to make sure that our young people know who Lewis Latimer was, who, other Black inventors were, who created things, so that we don't seem like we always came in need of something, right? So that the whole notion of, color, of colorism, it still absolutely plagues us. We have embraced and internalized that notion that white is right. And it's only emphasized in these communities where we move into. Our children are in the minority in terms of numbers. And so in a classroom, the teacher has, unknowingly decorated with pictures of little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls and little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys, and there's no one that represents who our young Black and brown kids are. They don't see themselves on the wall. They don't see themselves in front of the classroom. The statistics in Connecticut around teachers, there's like something like 2 Black teachers for every 100 students, something crazy like that. So our kids are not seeing themselves on the walls. They're not seeing themselves in ads. They're not seeing themselves in front of the classroom. And so we do have responsibility to ensure that happens. Now, corporate America said, particularly over the last year, on the heels of George Floyd, they were like, you know what? It's a little bit more, and I do give them credit for saying it's more than just this one issue of violence, right? Because we all know we've been watching Black men be killed, whether by police or vigilantes or whatever the case may be, for the last decade plus, hundreds of years, right? Like, if we really want to talk about it. But I do give them credit for saying, you know what, it's bigger than that. Because of what we see and how we feel about you, and quite frankly, how we've been taught about you, we just don't even assume that you would be positioned in these places. And we think that those of you who are astute enough are like anomalies. Like, oh, look, I've never met anyone like you before. And so we don't think
eloquently and
articulate.
So articulate.
So we have one of you. So that's
look,
great.
Look, the real, what they really want to say. We didn't know your kind act this way. That's what they really want to say.
Correct. So, they have a few and they're like, okay, we're good. So now everyone was like, well, actually, we're not representative of the population in your organization. So let's talk about that. Now, everyone is like bemoaning the fact that it's a year in and a lot of organizations haven't made a whole lot of change. Well, hello. It's been hundreds of years that we have established the system that we live in. We cannot expect 1 year everything to automatically poof with a magic wand. And so people who do work like I do in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, a lot of organizations are hiring consultants like me. My organization, Exec Mommy Group, we go into organizations, education, nonprofit, the private sector, to help them identify gaps and opportunities to literally accomplish their desired outcomes through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. So they're hiring us like crazy. I wasn't planning to be an entrepreneur. Next thing you know, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've never worked as hard in my life than working for myself.
You try to tell them.
Okay.
Hey, Joel.
Yes.
Before you continue talking about Executive Mommy, which is, you're going to probably have to start hiring more people because the requests are coming in.
Absolutely.
But let's back up a little bit and really provide some more history on the importance of diversity efforts reflecting the experiences of women of color. There was a case somewhere around 1975, 76. There were 5 African-American women who essentially attempted to sue General Motors for discrimination. But their claims were dismissed because they weren't covered within the existing legal framework. Correct. In other words, there was no precedence for that type of claim that they were saying they were discriminated against.
Right.
However, there was General Motors white female employees, because they had never experienced that particular discrimination. The plaintiffs, Black women, could not sue for gender. discrimination.
Right. That's right.
And men of color hadn't experienced it either. So their complaint fell on deaf ears, and couldn't be covered under the racial discrimination. And further, I think it all will also mention that the U.S. judicial system simply did not have like the legal nuance to address the situation, specifically of women of color. And so when we begin talking about like 40 years later, similar issues persist across, I think, all industries, all sectors. And, you know, I can spew out data. I'm sure you have that as well. But how has that been impacting this type of behavior in terms of lack of diversity? And I mean, you mentioned it. You said, look, it's just a year coming off the heels of George Floyd. We have a lot of work to do, and change does not happen overnight. But I'm of grave concern that while we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I feel most times women of color, they're sort of either left by the wayside or not as supported as men of color, you know, making their way to the C-suite, if you would. I know that's old terminology for some folks, but in some of these senior level positions.
And if they do make it, the pay isn't the same.
Correct. Right. Pay equity is a huge issue. I mean,
and thanks to the General Assembly here in Connecticut, we did work on pay equity.
Yes.
We're nowhere near where we need to be, but we're working toward it. So
yeah, but it's a conversation, right? And you have to start somewhere. I think, you know, one of the challenges about the scenario you described today, race is a protected class. Then it was not, right? So you automatically can bring forth grounds on the basis of racism. But I will tell you that racial discrimination is extremely hard to prove. You almost have to have literally the evidence of someone having a noose on your desk, you know, in order to prove the treatment that we receive, which in many instances is not always spoken. It can be symbolic. When we talk about microaggressions, right? Those unintended consequences. So, you know, I make a comment, and we hear this oftentimes, you know, things like, you know, you're pretty for a Black girl or things of that nature, right? The person who's saying it doesn't even think that it's, you know, racist, right? But when you hear that enough times, it begins to impact you, right? So now, do I feel less than? Am I questioning whether or not I'm beautiful, and why is it qualified with for a dark girl or for a Black girl? Like, why do we engage in that? Or hearing people say, "Oh gosh, you speak so well," you know, as if, what exactly did you expect me to sound like when I open my mouth? You know, and it's that kind of thing that is exhausting. And when we talk about microaggressions, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. So, you know, a paper cut is really small. You don't necessarily see it, but boy, don't put your hand, you know, near a lemon or this, and you're like, ooh, this is the pain of a whole nother level. And imagine that every single day. Some people talk about it like mosquito bites. Imagine that every single day. You walk into the office and that's what you are confronting. So there are things that particularly women of color are dealing with that are in place before you even get to sit down at your computer and start your work. You're thinking about, you're battling through things, assumptions that people are making about you, and your capability to handle things. You know, we have just seen in this last couple of weeks with Simone Biles, with Naomi Osaka, saying like, listen, and I give these young sisters a lot of credit because I think, I'm a Gen Xer. There's no way in the world at that age we would have been like, nope, you just push through it. And, so to hear them say like, no, I'm not doing this. It's too much. I'm all set. Yeah, I'm not, and I think it's really important. I mean, I'll be in full disclosure, full transparency. I started doing some work on myself earlier this year because I was like, wait a minute, there's so much that we own as Black women. Like, we're supposed to be like, wait, let me juggle this, let me carry this, let me hold this or whatever. And I was like, wait, hold on a minute. Let's think through this, and I started talking through it. And I came up with this phrase. For me, I cook a lot. It's one of my stress relievers. But what I noticed is that, what we've been taught, we fix everybody else's plate first, right? Always. I was like, nah, I'm fixing my plate first. I've been standing here cooking it. I know what part of it is real good that I want, and whatever piece or whatever. Yep, I'm getting it first. So that's my thing now. I'm like, I'm fixing my plate first. Fix your plate first, sis. Like, no. We have to own the fact that, we are expected to be so strong and carry so many things in the workplace, at home, etc., that creating boundaries is so critically important for your mental health. So you can show up at work as your best self. So you can show up at home as your best self. So you can show up for you as your best self, right? And I think that's all the stuff that Black women are dealing with in the context of the workplace. I think brothers, they've been able to connect with white men. They use the same facilities. They have those conversations, the elbow to elbow out on the golf course or whatever. We weren't invited to those places. And the white women were, in some instances, intimidated by us. We weren't invited to be around them either. So we're behind the times in terms of being able to enter into some of these places. And then to your point, what happens is we are hired into HR or diversity or communications or marketing, as if we can't impact from a corporate perspective, profit and loss businesses. Like, look at Ursula Burns, look at Carla Harris. Bad, right? On Wall Street for years. But like the rest of us can't do that. And so we're pigeonholed into positions, and I'm glad to see that many of our young sisters are like, no, I'm not staying there. I'm going to reinvent myself, or I'm going to really be true to myself and who I am and amplify that. And what we've done is we've been like, you know what? Take your job. I'm going to go start my own. Right. Black women have opened the most businesses in the context of the pandemic. When we were in the economic downturn back in 2008, who was opening businesses? Black women.
So I think, honestly, that's a great segue into Exec You Mommy. I know you were talking a little bit about it early on in the second segment, but fill us in again how people can connect you, the work that you're doing, and you will travel, okay?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or what is this?
Well, we live on Zoom. Yes. Right. Zoom is definitely happy with me as a customer, for sure.
I know that's right.
For sure. But yeah, so the original origins of Exec Mommy was I started writing a book that I've actually never finished called Tales of an Executive Mom.
Oh, wow.
And it was because one of my interns asked me at one point, how do you do it? Like, we're watching you. At the time I was married, you have kids, you have this demanding job, and, you're involved in the community, sorority, church, etc. Like, how do you do it?
And so she balanced it all, Shay. It was like, I don't know how.
Yeah. So I started to think about it, like, really, what did I do? So I really started doing a lot of reflecting on, like, what lessons did I learn from women that I've known? And the intent of the book, I was supposed to ultimately interview all these different women from different places. And I had written some stuff and I just haven't finished it. That's a whole other story. But because it was Tales of an Executive Mom, I started referring to myself as Exec Mommy. And so fast forward years later, when I was making a career transition, I realized that I liked consulting. I enjoyed being able to go in, assess a situation, give my recommendation, and leave. And I started doing some consulting for a friend of mine. And ultimately, in my career transition, I always say that God was like, stop playing around. I told you that Exec Mommy Group is what you need to be doing right now, because I had applied for a job that I thought I could have done with my eyes closed, and I didn't get it. And when I asked them for feedback, they were like, well, you blew them away. Well, who doesn't hire somebody because of that? Why? Because they weren't ready. They weren't ready to do D&I the way I do D&I. So I was like, okay, catch a clue. You're going to run your own business. Even then, and this is back in May of 2019, I still never imagined that Exec Mommy Group would be this like real legitimate business. Like, to me,
we're talking shy of 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, it was like what I was going to do on the side. And I fully expect that I'll be back in corporate. I'm teaching a few classes. So I'll just, I'll go back to corporate. And then George Floyd was killed. And it took me a minute to respond because I was in my feelings about the whole situation. I did not have voice. I didn't have anything to say. And then I realized people are kind of waiting for me to say something. So the minute I kind of, stepped out there, it was really just a blessing of, organizations that I had some connection to, or colleagues of mine, in that, in our village, everybody wins village, of being like, hey, I want you to come into my organization. I want you to come into my organization, and really building a business where I have actually hired some folks. I have some folks on retainer. At this point, because the volume and the demand is so significant. And so, interestingly enough, my career is so varied, right? I didn't stay in one place. I was in higher ed, I was in corporate, and it seems so odd. Like, people always told me, like, it might be hard for you, the headhunters, it might be hard for you to get into something because you don't have like the consistent path up. But what my clients are telling me is they appreciate the diversity of my experiences.
Exactly.
And so, as long as folks decide that they want to be talking about this, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and it connects to you asked, Brandon, I'm sorry, I didn't even respond to the piece about, connection to racial equity. A lot of organizations have been doing diversity for a long time. Doing diversity, meaning like, oh, it's the nice thing to do. Let's all hold hands, one Black person, one gay person, someone in a wheelchair, and sing Kumbaya, right? And that is not what it's about. So that's the start of it. Like, do you have people represented in your organization who represent different groups, different perspectives, different backgrounds? That in and of itself is an opportunity. But then how do you invite them in, right? That's where inclusion comes in. So diversity is the mix, the representation, who's there. Inclusion is what you do with it. So you have all these folks with different backgrounds, but how do you amplify their voices? How do you bring them in? How do you help them develop solutions? That's the challenge. Then equity, we've lived as a society talking about everything should be equal. All people should be equal. No disrespect to the civil rights movement, right? Because we needed equality then, because at that point, we didn't even have the same bathrooms. But now we're talking about, it's not just about give me what you have. It's give me what I need. I may not need that thing that you're giving. I need something different because I'm inherently a different person. So being capable enough to acknowledge as an organization, everybody doesn't need the same thing. Absolutely, they need to have fair access, universal access. But once I get here, maybe I don't need all of those things, right? I need these things. And being nimble enough to be able to provide them for folks in your organization. So that at the core is the definition of those terms.
Well, I know we talked a little bit about, I'm laughing because pre-show we talked about the baby and the little baby and all these different versions of
like little
babies. But Shay, fill us in on what's been happening and how we can make a connection to today's conversation, essentially. And then, next week we could really unpack sort of the contradiction of how we're handling many of these conversations. And I'll just leave it at that. But I know you wanted to talk.
Yeah, because I know we gotta go. We could talk all day with her. I love it. But what first I want to back up. One of the key things that you said was when the George Floyd incident happened, it was like everyone was waiting for you to speak. If you didn't speak, you were a part of the problem at that point, because I know there were a lot of us that were quiet from years and years on out on different things that happened. But at this time, we all needed to speak up. So I appreciate you for bringing light to that, because I was one at my feelings was hurt, and I spoke up. And I'm one that always try to stay away from stuff in politics, but no, everyone had to put all 10 toes down at that point.
That's right.
Or you were a part of the problem. So I appreciate that for bringing light to that. Now, you also talked about just the LGBT community and women of color. Now, here we are with the baby, which I'm so angry with him. However, I don't know. I'm a little confused too with the people, because here he had all these sponsors at one point. So and wait, just to give us
an idea as to what happened.
What happened was he during a Rolling Loud festival, if people don't know what Rolling Loud is, it's where a bunch of artists go to and they perform and show their artistry and so forth on this big stage. And I hear it's really fun. You walk in, there's a bunch of rides and so forth, and a bunch of activities that you can participate in. But apparently he get on stage during his performance and he tell others, those who, and I'm just gonna not really verbatim say what he said, but he said, shine your light on you, put your flashlight up on your phone if you come here with that's HIV free, AIDS free, and no disease that's going to kill you in the next 2 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks. Or he also said, Also put your lighters up if you're not in the parking lot doing sexual activities with the same sex. And once again, I'm not going to really say verbatim what he said. So now at this point, it brings an uproar to those who are affected by HIV and AIDS, as well as the LGBT community. Okay. Now, this was an issue that came up today. And all these people are looking to cancel him out and cancel all his contracts and sponsorship and so forth. But when the baby was speaking about killing with black on black crime, as well as talking about our black woman and just disrespecting him through his music, he was praised behind this. So here it is, a situation, again, not to, once again, trust me, I'm not against the LGBT community. I do not want anyone to think that, but I'm also a black woman that did not get protection as well during this time. So I just want to speak on this a little bit,
Yeah, it's interesting. And, it comes down to power and resources, right? So, we are always, there's still, if you think back to Step and Fetch It and all that stuff back in the 40s and 50s, right? Like, it's not very much different now. From what I understand, I don't know the baby, but from what I understand, a lot of these, artists that come out here, they are carrying this image that the industry has placed on them. Like, you got to be this, you need to show up as this. A lot of those people don't even come from the kind of background that they're singing about, rapping about, whatever. Like, nobody's doing all of that.
Even 6ix9ine. I know you probably don't know 6ix9ine. I'm not sure.
I do.
You know 6ix9ine. Okay. Once again,
Joel,
they got him
know
up.
About 6ix9ine? I don't know about 6ix9ine.
They got him out of a sandwich shop, just so you know. And they said, we're going to play like you're a gang member because this is what they want. They're going to accept. It was something they created.
Yeah, they create that image. I know someone years ago who was in the industry and, brilliant singer, songwriter, the whole nine. This is way back. This is like in the 80s when like Janet Jackson was out. Janet Jackson had the whole Pleasure Principle thing, right? Well, so they wanted her to do, like, they wanted her to have an image. They wanted her to have this ultra sexy image or whatever. And she was like, nah, that's not who I am. I'm a vocalist. And so like, just like that first album, first song, drop. Never heard another thing about her again. Wow. Because that's what it's all about, image. Can they make, especially, for the kids, can they make merch off of it? Can they make, all these different things? The kids gonna buy the hat or the, the sneakers or whatever, or the shirt with whatever dumb hashtag saying that they gotta have. That's what it's all about. It's all about money.
It's definitely
so where the baby went wrong is he got a little too comfortable and he started talking probably the foolishness that really is in his head and forgot. And, and everybody was like, uh-oh, So of course they have to pull their support. They're not going to, do you recognize, Black community, Latino community, LGBT community, the buying power in the trillions of dollars, larger than some countries. They're not going to keep their support there. Are you kidding me? They dropped them like a hot potato. No, so now
he did come on and apologize, but it was sort of half-hearted.
Oh, he apologized. He said, he apologized for the HIV and AIDS comment, but it was like what he said with the LGBT community
sounded foolish. He said something like, well, so y'all, so my bad. LGBT. First of all, everybody that has AIDS is not an LGBT community.
No, they're not.
And then two, he was like, so my bad, LGBT community. Y'all do what y'all do.
Exactly. Pretty much like I said what I said.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so
then,
I will say this, and I'm gonna end it on this note. Us as a Black culture, we are the only one to disrespect our Black woman in our music.
Terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. And like I said, I have a 17-year-old, almost 18-year-old going off to college. And when I hear her playlist and she'll be like, oh, sorry, Ma. Now, I remember growing up, there were songs I knew the words to that I wasn't going to sing in front of my mother, but didn't mean I didn't know the words to them. But I'm just like looking at some of the things that even our young women are putting out there, right? Women that these young girls are holding up in high esteem, whether you down with this one or that one. I'm not going to say the names, but I'm like, really? That's what?
And just because I'm eavesdropping in y'all women power empowerment conversation here, I have two girls, and
yes, you do.
I know we pray for you every day.
I am very concerned with some of the artists female artists that are out there, and they're not what I would want my daughter to
at all.
Well, I will say this: it's more accessible now due to social media platforms. So, in my opinion, I would try to keep them away from social media platform as long as you can. Yeah. That would be my first take on that. And two, stay away from the radio. I remember going to
radio.
You know, sometimes when they get older, you're gonna start bringing them to school and stuff. And
we do XM, don't we?
Yeah, but even still,
we had a playlist. We had a ride to school playlist that had a lot of like kid. Well, they didn't like Kids Bop, see, my kids didn't like Kids Bop. They were like, "Ma, that's real corny." So we just got all the clean version. You know, because Walmart used to sell back when you still bought stuff as opposed to downloading it. Yeah. But you can still search for clean versions of things. Most things for the younger kids. But when they get to be teenagers, it's like inevitable.
Yeah, that's true. So just continue to instill that within the home, Brandon. That's all I'm saying. Just treating them how a woman should be treated is definitely the foundation, because they know and have that foundation at home, they know when they get out there, something's not right. That would be my recommendation.
That's right. So, well, I would say this has been part one, I think, of another conversation.
I know.
Because Joelle is not only this very constant professional, she's also there's something about her in the church, we'll say, very spiritual and uplifting.
Very uplifting, because I can listen to you all day, girl.
I know. I saw Shay was like, she can probably get some popcorn and just sit back.
Listen,
this is
because you're speaking in real stuff, and it's sad.
Yeah. And I'm happy though that we're able to use this platform on FUBU Radio to share with the thousands, even millions of people that listen to this show weekly, right here inside the room with myself, State Representative Brandon McGee, also alongside my co-host Shay McCray of The Takeover. And I'm just happy. No, I have not addressed my social media handle. So y'all already know what it is. It is _BLMJ_ on IG. Y'all follow me. I got TikTok going too, y'all. So stay tuned to some of my videos. I don't know how well I'll do, but
I have TikTok too, but I don't have a lot out there.
I don't have a lot out there.
But before we go though, Joelle, tell us again your social media handle, your website, how people can connect with you and
absolutely. So you can reach me at Exec Mommy, the business Exec Mommy group on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. They're all the same. Exec Mommy group. I just want to let you know. Brandon.
I'm outnumbered, y'all. I'm outnumbered.
Yep. Yes. Well, thank you so much.
And Twitter. I'm sorry. I don't do Twitter as much as I should, but I just got some advice from my public relations consultant that I need to spend more time on Twitter.
You could share at the same time.
Okay, that's the only thing I do. I just don't look at Twitter at all.
I don't look at it.
I just share it, and then
Yeah.
My only concern about using those apps that post the same thing across all social media is each platform is different and the audience is different.
That is true.
And so it kind of worries me a little bit sometimes, but Twitter is where it is as well, especially
that's what everybody's saying.
Types of conversations folks are especially Black Twitter. I love Black Twitter.
I keep hearing about this Black Twitter. I have not tapped into it yet.
I'm grateful for people who put it onto Instagram, because that way, that's how I always find out what's happening on Black Twitter.
I'm a grammar.
I like Instagram.
Yes. So
Joelle,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yes. All right. Well, you guys, y'all know what it is. Y'all make sure y'all follow us, Official FUBU Radio, and tell somebody to download the FUBU Radio app, and follow me, Shay McCray. That is ShaymCCray. And thank you guys for tuning in inside the room with State Representative Brandon McGee. It's the takeover, baby.